Taliban fighters have held victory parades in the Afghan capital to mark a year since they seized power. Fighters and their supporters paraded banners and flags through Kabul on foot, bicycles and motorcycles. One group marched past the former US embassy. The Taliban captured Kabul after a lightning offensive, just as US troops were preparing to leave the country after 2 decades.
We are very happy. We always had a vision of free and prosperous Afghanistan, and that is what we fought for over the past 20 years. Today, seeing the result of the struggle is like a dream come true. All of our dreams and hopes have turned into reality with the grace of God.
But 1 year on, the economy is struggling, women have been stripped of their rights, and millions of people don't know where their next meal is coming from. Osama bin Javed reports from Kabul on the Taliban's year in power and what lies ahead.
A rare sound in Afghanistan. A musician and driver, Akhtar has lived in a refugee camp since his childhood. He's among the more than 3 million people displaced in Afghanistan.
Before it was good, but now life just passes us by. Before we could find some food for our children, but the change in government means there is no work now.
A year ago, tens of thousands of people headed for the borders as provinces fell to the Taliban. Many in Kabul rushed to the airport as the Western-backed government collapsed. After taking refuge abroad, Ashraf Ghani's denied that he escaped with suitcases full of cash. More than 100,000 people left during the abrupt withdrawal of foreign forces. The economy collapsed, and the US froze billions of dollars of foreign reserves. The US-NATO alliance spent an estimated $300 million a day every day for 2 decades. But basics such as roads, schools, hospitals are either non-existent or in poor shape. Since the Taliban took over, that money has stopped coming in, and thousands of professionals have left. Human Rights Watch has accused the Taliban of a long list of abuses, restricting the rights of women and girls, suppressing media freedom, and detaining, torturing, and executing critics and perceived opponents. All allegations the Taliban denies.
In some other areas, things are good. We're trying to improve. But we should also take into account the problems of the coronavirus, the suspension of foreign aid, the freezing of money, the problems in banking, the drought. All of these together have increased the problems for the people of Afghanistan.
For those who've left, life's not easy. More than half the 20,000 Afghans who reached the UK are still in temporary accommodation. There's a lack of prospects abroad, and many face harassment and the threat of detention.
I
lost everything, including my restaurant. I planned to go to Europe, so I went to Turkey. Unfortunately, they captured us and deported us to Iran. Thank God now we are in our homeland, and now we'll never go anywhere else.
In a year, security has improved, but poverty and desperation have increased. And while the Taliban seeks international recognition, there are some concessions it seems unwilling to make. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Over the last few days, Afghanistan's leaders have been addressing the accusations made against them. A foreign ministry spokesman told Osama bin Javed that a lot of the country's economic problems began during the US occupation.
They have decided on a path of collective punishment for the people of Afghanistan, with steps such as sanctions on trade, on banking, and the overall country, the state of Afghanistan, the freezing of assets, the blacklists. So people, banks and companies do not have the confidence and are afraid that if they do deal with the state and the government of Afghanistan, that they will face similar sanctions. When it comes to hospitals, schools, infrastructure, basic infrastructure, nothing was built over the last 20 years of occupation. It was all an artificial economy that collapsed overnight. So now the government is moving on the path towards self-sufficiency.
Many Afghans who fled during the takeover last year are trying to bring their families to the US. The migration process is fraught with confusion and frustration. Rosalind Jordan reports.
This is a picture of my mother, my younger brother, who is in the US right now. And this is
an Eid party at Hamid Mahmoud's family home in Kabul in August 2021, 2 weeks before the Taliban toppled the civilian government. Could you see the signs?
Yes, but I didn't expect it to happen in like 2 weeks. I was thinking maybe this takes like probably another year at least.
But after months of fighting, the Taliban returned to power on August 15th. Anyone with ties to the U.S. was now considered an enemy of the state. The Biden administration promised to help those who worked with the Americans during 20 years of war.
You have heard us say for the better part of a year now that the United States has an enduring commitment not only to the people of Afghanistan, but of course to American citizens, to lawful permanent residents, some 1,300 of whom we have helped transport out of Afghanistan over the course of the past year, but also to Afghans to whom we have a special commitment.
The U.S. has resettled more than 80,000 Afghans, but critics say many more are still in limbo. That's because the U.S.'s immigration system wasn't designed to handle thousands of emergency residency permits, refugee applications, and visas to those who worked with the U.S. military all at the same time.
In order for any of these three pathways to work, there needs to be a plan to get people out and moving out, and that plan is going to need significant political backing by the administration. It needs to be the highest priority, otherwise it's not going to happen.
Mahmoud, an American citizen for more than 10 years, used his connections to help his brother escape during the final days of the U.S. military evacuation. Now he's trying to bring his fiancée and his mother, a former girls' school principal, to the U.S.
She helped U.S. servicewomen in Afghanistan, in Logar province, helped the PRT from Czech Republic. She was the director of Women's Affairs, defended the democratic values that America was promoting there.
The women have been living in a temporary shelter in Qatar since April. No one can tell them when they can fly to the U.S. Mahmoud has a message for the Secretary of State.
If I am that official and I tell you, under process, we don't know if and when this is going to be done, how would you feel about it?
A call to the U.S. to help Hamid Mahmoud's family and every other Afghan family fearful about life under Taliban rule. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
The UN's humanitarian coordinator for Afghanistan says the humanitarian assistance given to Afghans over the last year is unprecedented.
In that period of time, we have reached more than 22.9 million people, at least one form of humanitarian assistance, and we were able to provide this support in more than 401 all of the country's districts. And that represents quite an impressive reach out to the estimated 95% of the population which required assistance. Now, having said this, through the winter, which we crossed with generous support of the donors, the worst case scenario, which is the famine, widespread famine in Afghanistan, was avoided.